I don't know what happened to that one I was doing before, but it just kind of shut down on me, and that happens ever so often. One of these days I'll figure out these cameras a little bit better, how they work, why they just, and I didn't even touch anything as near as I could tell, and it just shut down. So, but like I say, I'll figure it out sometime, but this is why this is a part 2 of that. And I guess it's appropriate because I was going to do something a little bit different in the middle of the video. So, but I wanted to talk about something that I was watching another person's, did a video today and was talking about Mary and Martha. This is a story from the Gospel of Luke, Luke chapter 10. And many people are familiar with this story of Mary and Martha when Jesus comes to their house. And Martha, it says, is busy fixing dinner, I guess you could say, and Mary just sitting and listening to what Jesus has to say. And Martha gets kind of upset, Mary, because Mary's not helping her. It's like, Mary's letting Martha do all the work, and she's not contributing anything, and she's just listening to Jesus. And Martha complains to Jesus, "Why don't you tell Mary to get up and help me?" And Jesus says to Martha, "You're too busy." He says, "You're too busy doing what you're doing." He says, "You're busy doing all this stuff, and only one thing's needed. And Mary's chosen the better thing." He doesn't say what Martha did was wrong, but he says Mary's done what's better. It's often a good point to remember. Sometimes we do things that aren't necessarily wrong, but they are at the expense of something that's better. It's an interesting thing to think about. But one other thought on it was this. It's not just sort of aside from that particular instance, and it's Luke chapter 10, verse 38 and following, where it talks about that later on in the ministry of Jesus, in fact, almost at the very end, he goes to Bethany, where they lived at, and he goes in their house with their brother Lazarus. And Mary takes, the Bible calls it a ointment, a spikenard, depending on what version you're reading. But at any rate, it says that she took it and tore it open, broke it open, and anointed his feet with it, and wiped his feet with her hair. And it was a very costly thing, we're told. And the other disciples, led by none other than Judas Iscariot, get very mad at Mary as well. Martha had been mad before, but they're mad at her now because they say she wasted this. So this could have been sold and given to the poor. And we're told it could actually have been sold for a very large amount of money and given to the poor. And so Jesus complains to them, or not, he complains, he rebukes them. They've complained to him, he rebukes them and says, "Leave her alone." Says she's done a good thing. Said, "The poor you've always got with you, and you can do them good whenever you want to." He said, "But you're not always going to have me with you." And then he says to them, he tells them, "She did this in preparation for my burial." This is in John chapter 12, by the way. And this is an interesting thing of what he says about why Mary did this. That she did this in preparation for my burial. Maybe that caught him by surprise, what he had said. Now, Jesus had told his disciples on more than one occasion that he was going to Jerusalem and he was going to be killed. And the disciples, it seems to have just gone over their head, except for Peter. Peter seems to have understood it, but he rebukes Jesus. In Matthew 16, for example, and Jesus tells them it's going to happen. It says Peter takes him aside and begins to rebuke him, saying, "This will never happen to you." And then that's when Jesus says to him, "Get thee behind me, Satan." Now, Peter had just incidentally confessed Jesus was the Christ, the Son of the living God, and Jesus had just told him, "Blessed are you, Simon." It says, "For flesh and blood didn't give this to you, but my Father in heaven." And then We don't know how much later it was, but we assume just maybe a few minutes, few hours, whatever it would have been later. He's telling Peter, "Get thee behind me, Satan." And he says, "For you're not thinking about the things of God, but the things of men." Sort of almost the opposite. Before he'd said, "Flesh and blood didn't tell this to you, God did." Now he's saying, you're not thinking about the things of God, you're thinking about the things of men. It's almost like Peter does a complete 180. He understood what Jesus was saying, but he said, no. After he just said, "You're the Christ, the Son of the living God," now he thinks he knows more than him. Now Peter thinks, well, yeah, but I know more about what the Messiah is going to do than you do. Peter and the rest of the disciples were probably caught up in their own idea of what the Messiah was going to be, and the idea of a dying and rising Messiah was not what they had in mind. But Mary seems to understand. Now, I've read a lot of commentators on this, and they'll try to say, well, Mary, or in the other Gospels, Mark's Gospel, for example, it doesn't tell her name, but I said, well, she didn't know, that that's what she was doing, anointing him for his burial. It just so happens that that's what Jesus says. Well, it doesn't say anything in the Gospels that she didn't know. It seems the implication is she knew. The rest of the disciples didn't know what Jesus was about to go through, not because they weren't told, but because they weren't paying attention. They were not good learners, which is interestingly enough what the word disciple means, a learner. But on that instance, they weren't very good learners. Jesus made it pretty clear to them, but their minds seemed to be closed to it. But Mary seemed to have known. Now, I don't know how Mary knew, we're not told, but I often wonder, maybe that's what Jesus talked to her about when he was there in her home with her and Martha for lunch that day. And she took the time to sit at his feet and listen to what he had to say. Maybe on that day, maybe he told her that, and maybe she took it in, whereas the other disciples seemed to have either gone over their head or they just didn't want to hear it. Maybe she, in her humble spirit, that teachable spirit that she had, maybe she learned that day. So it's very important for us to learn anything that we have to be teachable. The greatest people that you know, just pretty much in any field that are very knowledgeable in it, were people that at one time were very teachable in it. And here's the interesting thing, the more knowledgeable they are, they're probably still very teachable. They're still trying to learn. People that you take anybody in any field that you think is an expert, that knows a lot, they're constantly trying to learn more. They're lifelong learners. So it's very important that we remember that, and especially when we're wanting to learn from Jesus, that we have to be teachable. See, the disciples, seemingly they wanted to hear what they wanted to hear, not what he had to say. But Mary was very open to what he had to say. So to be like Mary, to have that humble spirit that she had, that she did this for him, and if this was something very costly that she gave, it was something she gave up. She was very, not only very humble, but very giving. We have to be very teachable as well. And that means we open it up to learn from him. In the school that Jesus had, his school of discipleship, there's no graduation day. I read somebody years ago that made that statement. Said there's no graduation day from his school. We have to be lifelong learners, but we have to have that spirit that Mary had. And if we do, look at the results of it. She seemed to have known a lot more than even his closest disciples did, even more than Peter, James, and John, who were the ones closest to him. She seemed to have known more. So that's a good lesson, a good thing to remember, is to stay close to him, but to be open to what it is he has to teach us. And he's not here today, obviously, in physical form to teach us, but he's left us things and people who can. The disciples themselves end up being the teachers for everyone else, because they do get humble themselves. They didn't humble themselves, but they were humble. And they ended up teaching everybody else that's been passed on. So it's just one of the great lessons and one of the great pieces of advice for all of us is to be people who are learners. Never think that we've finished learning, because the more we learn the more there is to learn. So it's a good thing to remember, to be teachable, be humble, and be willing to learn. So that's what I wanted to say, just having seen something earlier about that. And I'm still here in the area I was, in this area of the area of that creek. It's risen. And this is about as far as I can go on this little trail here. It's not. I guess I could probably go further than this through there, but there's a lot of brush in the way. Maybe some of the time I will try that. But I just wanted to come out here today because this is a little bit new. I don't think I've ever filmed anything here before. Maybe, like I said, when I try to adventure a little further down, I'll film that at some point in time in the future. But I hope everyone, today is Wednesday as I'm filming this, and I'll try to put this on today. This is the 10th of January. I looked at it earlier. Christmas is only 50 weeks away, so we're still here at the beginning of the year. But I will try to put this on here in a little bit later. So I hope everybody has a blessed day, has a good day today. And like I said, I don't know what happened earlier to that earlier one, but that's the pitfalls of filming. At times you're at the mercy of the camera. So hope everybody has a blessed day, and I'll talk with you later.